It's all a kind of a sort of free exploration of various different things. Expressing or exploring the non-intellectual stuff, the more kind of physical stuff or the more emotional stuff. And it's gone through this journey of being quite literal to starting, and where it's at now is in a very abstract, painterly, material exploration place. I mean, I've always dabbled with paint, but I started really getting into it when I discovered oil paint for the first time. Strange to say you discover this ancient medium. But I started playing with oil paint probably about 6 years ago and just loved it. Because, I mean, I did art at school and we used acrylics all the time, and that can get quite muddy quite quickly, but oil paint's really robust. You can really push it around and pull it apart and bring it back from places. I don't use oils in any kind of like formal, technically appropriate way. I've never been taught to use oil paint. I just like playing with it. So I've started working on raw canvas now, and I quite like preparing that canvas badly, so that the effect that you get is very connected to a textile. It's more of a textile than a painting in a sense. It really kind of bleeds in a way that it should be horrific to any formal oil painter. Yeah, I quite like accidents. Through lockdown, because there hasn't been that much coming in from the outside, I've really just been working with what's coming out of the inside, if that makes any sense. So I've started bigger paintings that are very abstract, or they don't start with a plan. There's no structure to start on at all. It's just sort of free painting and exploring the materials, and it's often quite reflective of an emotional state in the end. Kind of, it just organically happens. I did a project a couple of years ago that was based on a series of glass plate negatives that I found in an antique shop. And I it was one of those weird moments where you know you shouldn't clutter up your house even more with stuff that you're never going to do anything with, but I bought them anyway, and they turned into this quite like 18-month long project that probably isn't finished yet, where I tried to research them. I tried to find out what they were of, where they were from. They were quite mysterious. And I also made paintings from them by projecting from the slide onto bits of off-cut wood, tracing them, and then just kind of free painting kind of quite unnatural colours into it. That was sort of a halfway house in a sense, because it was very very strongly framed within sort of real world, something that had come from the outside of me. Like, it had a very strong structure to it that still had that kind of academic root in it, but brought more kind of emotional freedom into an expression of it. Because they were glass plate, obviously they were glass plate negatives. When I held them up to the lights, the first thing I saw, I think, was a cheese plant in quite a modernist house, and it reminded me of my grandparents' house. And then I looked through more, and there was something quite Germanic about them. My grandmother's German, and so I kind of associate that with that. And they also looked very sort of 30s-ish. And there's something about having a German family. My grandmother left in the 20s, but I have German relatives, and there's always something a bit like there's a bit of anxiety when you see something German from the 30s, because you want to know what side of history that narrative is from. And I think that was my way in a sense. And where a lot of the kind of emotional drama in the paintings comes from is that sort of sense of impending doom, that there's something about that sense of anxiety that the future might have about looking back at this time, where there's a bit of it raises an uncomfortable question to us now, like, where are we, what are we doing now, how are we, what side of history are we on, basically. And then I think in the paintings I was bringing that out. I did a bit of research into the slides themselves, and they were made by the same company, AFGA. Photographers know this well. It was new to me. I mean, there's a lot that's weird about the slides, that they were being used at that time when people had started moving into film by that point. But that company were hired by Goebbels to try and make the first Technicolor German film, I think, as that propaganda department was trying to kind of push German film to keep up with Hollywood. And that film that they made, because they were trying to invent the process as they were going, because they were under so much pressure to make this film, the colours were all wildly off, like, you know, purple sky and orange grass and things like that, which is ironic because Hitler waged war on many people, but modern artists as well, with that big degenerate art show that he put on. And part of his reasoning was that part of why he called them degenerate was because of the use of unnatural colour, in a sense. So that was in my mind, I think, as I was kind of playing with the different colours. And I think there is a sort of, with the use of colour, there is that sort of sense of impending doom, or something a little bit dark under the surface. There's a bit sort of noir-esque. I put an exhibition on last year about that at Electric Studio Project Space, just up in West St Leonards. And that was, it brought in another aspect of my work, the exhibition kind of design. I sort of turned it into an installation, which was really satisfying. I blew up the slides. I took images of them and got them printed and created a room where I drew out the details that I'd been researching in a sort of, you know, using red tape and giant post-it notes, inviting people to draw their own connections as well. So I raised questions as much as I provided answers, not that there are any answers, because it's just a lot of people who know a lot of things contributed to what they thought they were. And the audience brought quite a lot of interesting new information to the table as well, which is great. I love that in exhibition design, where you don't have a fixed, there's not a right or a wrong answer. It's an open question for people to bring their own expertise and their own opinions to. And then it led through, I think I presented the negatives themselves, and then it led through to the paintings, which the hope was that because people would be familiar with the images, they'd engage more with them by the time they got to that point. I really enjoyed that aspect of the treatments project that combined all of the different sides of me, the academic research, my personal history, my dread for the future socially, all of those things combined into one project. I think having the treatments exhibition was quite a big thing for me, and I think the work I've been producing during lockdown, I kind of want to put that together as a show and show it. A lot of what I'm working on now has quite, I guess it's about change and about being in the middle of change and it not having formed yet, but it being kind of starting to see patterns emerge. Which again, it's intellectualizing it. I think it came out of feeling sort of lost and at sea to an extent. Like trying just to translate how I'm feeling in the moment, and that will start with either a colour or a shape or just starting to get paint on the canvas. I quite like, again, this is horrific to many traditional painters, but I quite like just putting paint straight from the tube on and then mixing on the canvas. And as those shapes they just sort of start to want to be things. In various different projects, I've spent quite a lot of time digging around in archives. A lot of, mostly focused on sort of early 20th century kind of stuff, maybe through the 60s. Reading people's letters to each other, which is very nosy. That kind of left material just isn't the case anymore. That's not that's not how people are going to access the present if they're looking at it from the future. And so with things like Instagram, you have these enormous archives of people's lives, just so much information. And it definitely changes the significance of an image, but I guess it's a natural evolution. We are experiencing so much change at the moment, and kind of by definition, institutions will find it harder to change or to adapt. So like found spaces or spaces that exist but don't have that baggage to them probably feel a little bit more relevant at the moment. I mean, there's been a lot of talk during lockdown about sort of digital fatigue. And one of the things about that is because, I mean, most of the time we're engaging with just a screen, and there's a whole lot of peripheral vision that isn't being engaged in that sense. And that it's nothing like being in a space and being surrounded by your environment. It's never going to be able to really replace that. I think quite a lot in my work, there can be quite an attractive kind of physicality to them, but there's always something a little bit disconcerting about them. There's always something a little bit off. So I don't think people would really buy my work purely decoratively. I think there'd have to be something that made them intrigued about it. I might be wrong. I think one of the things I like exploring is the off-key in my work. Something slightly like disconcerting. So during lockdown, I surprised myself by wanting to do the same walk over and over again. On my daily walk, I'd walk from here in West St Leonards on the seafront to Bexhill and back. And there's something quite comforting about doing something over and over again, especially when you start, to do it at different times of day. As the seasons are changing, different weather conditions, you kind of see a lot more variety in the familiar than you do otherwise, especially as was the case for me in lockdown, because I did have a lot of freedom, free time, headspace to really slow down and start to notice individual details, start to notice change in a way, and kind of really, I feel much more embedded in the landscape here now as a result of that. I've always spent a lot of time on the beach since I've been down here because it's right there and it's wonderful. But I know it a lot better now, I think. And I understand the huge variety that exists in this landscape and how much is going on with it. Whereas I probably didn't engage with that so much. In terms of how much change we're experiencing at the moment, I think it's important to allow things to change and not try and hold on to keeping things as they were or going back to how things were or protecting things that no longer function so well. Thinking about institutions and thinking about, there being a lot more freedom for people to show what they want to show wherever they want to show it. I think we can do ourselves internal injury sometimes by trying to keep things fixed too much. I quite enjoy change, I think. As a person, I think I'm quite comfortable in fluid situations. Not completely comfortable, but I think I move through change fairly light-footedly. And I think that's a big part of the work that I have been doing during lockdown, is that just sort of doing something, even if it's about that uncertainty and not knowing where things are going, and still just moving things forward slowly, piece by piece, and waiting for something to emerge out of it. It's being patient with it. I think I quite liked that process. I think I quite like just like relaxing into starting something where you really don't know what you're going to be doing from one moment to another, and just allowing it to happen.